Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you were standing in front of a crowd. But not just any crowd. This isn't a stadium concert or a political rally. This is a crowd so vast, so endless, that the edges of it just kind of blur into the horizon.
Oh.
You literally cannot count the faces. And as you look closer, you realize it's a kaleidoscope. Every skin tone, every style of dress, every language on earth is here. But here's the strange part. They aren't fighting. They aren't negotiating trade deals. They're not, tolerating each other in some awkward silence. They are singing in perfect harmony.
It is an incredibly striking image, and for anyone familiar with the New Testament, that is the specific vision from Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, the great multitude that no one could number.
Exactly. It's this massive, beautiful, vivid scene. But here's the problem, and this is really the hook for our deep dive today based on these sources. For a lot of people, that image is just art.
The painting on the wall.
It's a nice painting on the wall of a cathedral, right? It's a poetic ideal that we'll get to eventually, maybe. But in the meantime, down here in the messy middle of history, mission or doing good doesn't feel like a song.
No, it feels like a checklist.
Right. It's metrics. It's strategy. It's a grind. It's, did we hit our numbers this quarter?
Or did I volunteer enough hours to feel like a good person?
Yeah.
It becomes a program to execute rather than a reality we're moving toward.
Exactly.
And the source material we are looking at today argues that this disconnect is actually the root of a lot of the burnout, anxiety, and cynicism we see. The core argument here is fascinating. We need to stop viewing mission as a job to finish and start viewing it as a rehearsal for the end of history.
A rehearsal. I love that metaphor, and we're going to unpack that because it totally changes the vibe of how you live your Tuesday morning. But first, we have to look at the goal. The source material makes a pretty bold claim right out of the gate. It says the ultimate goal of history isn't the success of an institution or even mission itself, it's worship.
That's right. It forces a complete reordering of priorities. There's a quote from John Piper that the source references, which frames this perfectly. Missions exist because worship doesn't.
Okay, let's stop and unpack that, because on the surface, that sounds almost backwards. Missions exist because worship doesn't. What is the actual implication there?
It means that mission, the act of going, sending, serving, proclaiming, it's temporary. It's a stopgap measure. It's the ambulance ride, not the recovery. In that final vision of the crowd we started with, there won't be missionaries.
Why not?
Well, because everyone will already know and worship God. So worship is the permanent reality. Mission is the temporary necessity to get us there.
So if you're focusing all your identity on the mission part, the strategy, the numbers, the busy work, you're focusing on the scaffolding and not the building?
Precisely. You're falling in love with the tools rather than the masterpiece the tools are building. And this brings us to a concept the text highlights, which might sound a bit academic, but it's actually incredibly practical. Teleology.
Break that down for us.
So it comes from the Greek word telos, which means the end, the goal, or the ultimate purpose. The authors argue that you cannot understand your life today, the aero flight of your daily existence, unless you understand the telos, the target where history is landing.
And according to Revelation 7, that telos isn't just heaven in some generic cloudy sense. It's specifically this massive multi-ethnic worship service.
Yes, and the details of that vision matter immensely. The text points out something very specific about that crowd. It emphasizes that nations, tribes, and languages are present. They are not erased. God doesn't bleach out culture to make everyone identical.
That is a crucial distinction. I think a lot of people assume that unity means uniformity, like we all wear the same beige robes and speak one cosmic language or something.
But the text says tribes and tongues. That implies distinctiveness. And the source makes a strong theological point here. It says diversity isn't just a modern political buzzword or, strategy for HR inclusion. In this text, it is a theological necessity. Redemption doesn't flatten our cultural identities. It preserves and sanctifies them.
So the idea is that God's glory is too big for just one culture to express it.
That's it, exactly. It takes every tribe and tongue to reflect that glory back fully. An American church can't capture it all. A Nigerian church can't capture it all. You need the full prism. But, and here's the key nuance, the center of that diversity isn't the diversity itself. They aren't worshiping their own cultures.
Right.
The text says they are standing before the throne and before the Lamb. That is the unifying center. It's a picture of redeemed diversity, harmony, not just proximity.
Okay, so if that is the telos, if that is the ending of the movie, How does knowing the ending change how we act in the middle of the movie? This brings us back to that rehearsal metaphor.
This is honestly the aha moment of the deep dive for me. If we accept that Revelation 7 is a guaranteed future, that God has promised this outcome, then our lives today aren't about frantically trying to manufacture a result. We
Hmm.
aren't improvising the script hoping the show doesn't flop. We are rehearsing a song that has already been written.
That takes a massive amount of pressure off, doesn't it?
It changes everything. It means that every local church gathering, every cross-cultural friendship, every act of reconciliation you engage in, it's a practice session for eternity. You are practicing the behaviors and the heart posture that will be fully realized then.
So when you invite a neighbor over who is from a totally different background than you, maybe a different religion, different socioeconomic status, you aren't just being nice, you are rehearsing.
You are aligning your present reality with the future reality. And the source outlines a framework for this. 5 pillars of living this out, they call it. Think missionally, live sacrificially, lead courageously, act strategically, and worship globally.
I want to touch on a couple of those, especially leading courageously and living sacrificially. But first, I want to connect this to the anxiety piece. The text explicitly mentions missionary anxiety.
Oh, it's a very real thing. If you believe the burden of the outcome rests entirely on your shoulders, that if you don't execute the strategy perfectly, the mission fails, that is crushing.
It's too much for any one person.
It is. It leads to burnout because you are trying to do God's job. But the Telos view says the outcome, the great multitude, is already secured by God. Our job isn't to guarantee the result. Our job is faithful alignment. We are responsible for the obedience. God is responsible for the outcome.
That moves you from a place of frantic activity to a place of faithful confidence. It's like investing in a stock that you somehow know for a fact is going to skyrocket in 10 years. You don't panic when it dips on a Tuesday.
That's the perfect analogy. And that confidence allows for those pillars like leading courageously. You can take risks because you know the ultimate victory is secure, or living sacrificially. You can give up comfort or reputation now because you are investing in a future that is guaranteed.
Speaking of living sacrificially, the source material pivots here to give us some historical receipts. It's easy to talk about this in theory, but they point to real people who actually lived with this end in view.
Right. The source highlights 3 figures who really embody this: Hudson Taylor, Lottie Moon, and William Carey.
Let's start with Hudson Taylor. He's the guy famous for going to China in the 19th century. But the text focuses on something very specific: his haircut.
It sounds trivial to modern ears, doesn't it? But at the time, it was radical. You have to understand the context. Most Western missionaries lived in compounds. They wore British suits, ate British food, and essentially communicated that to be Christian was to be Western.
Which goes directly against that Revelation 7 vision of preserving culture.
Exactly. Taylor looked at the telos. He saw Chinese people as part of that future multitude. And he realized his British culture was an obstacle. So he shaved the front of his head, grew a queue ponytail, and wore Chinese robes.
And I'm guessing the other Europeans were not fans of this makeover.
Oh, they hated it. They ridiculed him. They called him a disgrace to his race. But he practiced what the text calls strategic sacrifice. He sacrificed his cultural comfort and his reputation among his peers to remove barriers for the gospel. He wasn't trying to make Chinese people British. He's trying to introduce them to the Lamb.
That connects right back to the theology. He wasn't trying to erase their culture. He wanted to see their culture worshiping.
Precisely. Then you have Lottie Moon. Her story illustrates sacrificial living in a much heavier, raw way. She faced immense isolation, illness, war. She gave away her food during famines to the point of endangering her own health. She literally starved herself to feed the people she was serving.
Why do that? Why not just pack up and go home? I mean, it's logical to say, I can't help anyone if I'm dead.
Because she had an eternal horizon. She wasn't doing it for accolades. The source material points out that she believed her suffering was purchasing a hearing for the gospel that comfort never could.
And then there's William Carey, the father of modern missions. He has that famous quote, "Expect great things from God, attempt great things for God."
And people often misuse that quote, right? We slap it on coffee mugs and think it's about human ambition, like, go be a superstar for Jesus.
Yo, hustle. Yeah.
Right. But the source clarifies this. Carey wasn't relying on human efficiency. He was relying on doxology, on worship. He believed so strongly that God wanted to be worshipped by the nations of India that he could attempt great things, knowing God was in it.
It wasn't about his ability. It was about God's desire.
Exactly. When worship leads, mission flourishes. The text warns that when strategy leads without worship, Mission becomes bureaucratic, becomes colonial. It becomes about expanding our influence rather than God's glory. These historical figures didn't rely on efficiency. They relied on the promise of the end.
It's interesting you mention efficiency because that feels like such a modern obsession. We want results and we want them yesterday. But the source talks about something that is the opposite of quick results, generational faithfulness.
This is the idea that mission is a relay race, not a solo sprint. If you look at the Bible, God is always thinking generationally. Abraham to Isaac, Moses to Joshua, Paul to Timothy.
Paul to Timothy is a big one. The things you have heard me say, entrust to reliable people.
Right, so Timothy 2.2. The source discusses the tension between success and succession. In our culture, we define success as, did I hit my numbers this quarter? Did I build a big organization while I was the CEO? But true biblical success is continuity. Did I equip the next generation to keep the mission going?
That's actually scary for a lot of leaders. It means you have to share the spotlight, or maybe even step out of the spotlight entirely.
It requires deep humility. It requires checking your ego. The text warns that if we fail to pass the vision forward, not just the tasks, but the vision, the next generation might know the mechanics of church, but they won't know the heart of the mission. They'll inherit the machinery, but lose the engine.
So how do you pass that on? Is it just classes and sermons, handing them a manual?
No, and the source is adamant about this. It's about proximity. Jesus formed disciples by being with them. It's mentorship. You can't teach passion for the nations via a textbook. You teach it by letting someone watch you pray, watch you sacrifice, watch you treat a neighbor with dignity. It is caught, not just taught.
It's the difference between reading a manual on how to play baseball and actually playing catch with your dad in the yard. One gives you information, the other gives you instinct.
That's a great analogy. The source calls this proximity over position.
So we've talked about the high-level theology, the history, the generational stuff, but I want to land the plane for our listener, the learner. They might be thinking, I'm not a missionary in China. I'm an accountant or a teacher. I have a mortgage and a commute. How do I do this?
This is where we get to the Great Commission rule of life.
Rule of life, that sounds
Sure.
strict, like a monastery. Like I need to take a vow of silence and wear scratchy wool.
It can sound that way, but the source explains it beautifully. It's not a set of legalistic rules. Think of it as a trellis.
A trellis, like for a grapevine.
Exactly. A grapevine is organic, wild, and potentially messy. If you leave it on the ground, it rots in the mud. A trellis is a rigid structure that lifts the vine up so it can get sunlight and bear fruit. Rule of life is just a scaffolding of habits that supports your spiritual life.
So what goes on this trellis? What are the nails and wood?
It includes things like daily prayer, specifically praying for the nations or your neighborhood. It includes sacrificial giving, budgeting for the kingdom first. It includes intentional mentoring, identifying who your spiritual heirs are.
The source mentions a story about a literacy teacher in Africa to illustrate this micro-macro connection. Can you share that? I think that really drives the point home.
Yes, this is a perfect example of connecting the small act to the big vision. She's teaching literacy, a very local specific skill. That's the micro. It's repetitive, it's dusty, it's hard work. But she views it through the macro lens of Revelation 7. She isn't just teaching reading, she is empowering discipleship. She's giving these children the tools to read scripture, to lead their own communities, to join that global chorus.
She's not just grading papers, she's building the choir.
Precisely. So apply that to the listener. If you're a teacher, you aren't just managing a classroom. You are shaping minds to recognize truth. If you're in business, you aren't just making profit. You're generating resources for the kingdom and treating employees with the dignity of future co-heirs.
It really challenges that divide we make between sacred work and secular work. If it's all a rehearsal for the new creation, then the way you answer emails is part of the rehearsal.
It is, and it pushes back against that painting on the wall problem we started with. If you view Revelation 7 as just a painting, you admire it and walk away. But if you view it as the blueprint, you start building according to it right now.
It's asking yourself, does my calendar reflect the rehearsal? Does my bank account reflect the rehearsal?
Exactly. And it asks you to consider, who are you equipping? Who are you eating with? The table's a great place to rehearse. Who sits at your table? Is it only people who look and think like you? Or does your table look a little bit like that crowd in Revelation?
So let's bring it all together. We've covered a lot of ground. We are living in this tension, the source calls it, living between the promise and the fulfillment.
We have the promise of Genesis 12, that all nations will be blessed. And we have the fulfillment of Revelation 7, that all nations are worshiping. We live in the dash between those two dates.
So what here is that this isn't reserved for the professionals?
No,
Mm.
Absolutely not. It is for every believer. It changes how you view your neighbor. If your neighbor is from a different culture, do you see them as a threat? Or do you see them as someone who is missing from the chorus?
It completely reframes the interaction.
It also changes your anxiety levels. You don't have to save the world. The world is already saved by the Lamb. You just get to invite people to the celebration. It's an invitation, not a burden.
I love that. And it creates a life of anticipation. You are constantly looking for the echoes of that final song in your daily life.
You start to see the beauty and the diversity around you rather than being afraid of it. You start to see your work as a contribution to a kingdom that will not fade.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought that really struck me while reading through this. We talked about the rehearsal. If today, just today, this random Tuesday or Wednesday, was a rehearsal for the final celebration of history, did your life play the right notes?
That is a haunting and beautiful question. Are you building something that ends in a spreadsheet? Or are you building something that ends in a song?
Something that ends in a song, that is powerful.
Revelation 7 guarantees the song. Our privilege is to learn the melody now.
Well, there you have it, a deep dive into the end of history and how it changes the middle. We hope this helps you step into that vision where every nation rejoices. Thanks for listening.